It is great to be with this group tonight. I'm really excited for this next hour that we get to spend together. Happy Tuesday night, happy NFL night, I guess, which seems a little bit weird. But I'm just really excited to be here to talk about pandemic parenting, especially now that we're kind of quote unquote back to school. My name is John Frampton, and I'm a clinical psychologist. And first, want to give thanks to Jim Price and Bash Sports Academy for hosting this event and getting some of the organization and messages to all of you so that you could join this evening. My sons have been involved with baseball and have learned the most about baseball from a lot of the coaches at Bash, and they provide just such a positive and instructive experience. We really have appreciated Bash and how tonight came to be. Actually, Jim and I think knew of each other, but didn't know each other up until early August, I believe it was, when Jim sent out an email after his camps got up and running when the city started opening up again. And he noticed very astutely that, the kids weren't acting like the kids that he knew. And several of them had been around for a couple of years. And so he did know them. And he could see that their kind of stick-to-itiveness and their social skills and their patience were not at the level that they were in years prior. And so he shot a very thoughtful email out to everybody on his distribution list saying, hey, the kids aren't all right. Something's going on here. And we know that it's related to COVID-19. And I, both as a father and as a clinician, really respected that note, and that he had the thoughtfulness to alert us all to some of these things that he was observing, because he's right. And so we began to collaborate about, hey, is there anything we can do? And that's how we came to be getting together tonight to talk about this really important topic. And here's how it's going to run. I'm going to run through some slides and some ideas on parenting that I've developed over the past couple of decades working with families. I'm going to give you a little bit of science behind how emotions work, especially within the context of COVID-19, and how we can work with our kids as many of our kids are attempting remote learning. And then at the end, and I'll say thanks right now to the co-founder of our practice, Formative Psych Services, Dr. Kate Frampton, my lovely wife, is going to be sharing some of the questions that you may have along the way. And if you have questions, don't wait, get it in the Q&A box. And if there's a flurry of a similar question right on a particular point, I've asked Kate to just interrupt me so that we can answer that burning question. Otherwise, we'll wait till the end. I plan on going for about 45 minutes. I can go a lot longer, but it's Tuesday night. I'm sure that there's other things that are going on within your household. So I'm going to try and limit myself to 45 minutes and then take a few minutes of questions after that. And then we'll wrap up from there. My contact information will be available. If you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer them as a part of tonight's event. So a little bit of a quick bio about myself. I am a clinical psychologist. I was originally trained as a school psychologist. I've been in both private practices and schools, including being the principal of a therapeutic day high school for about 20 years now. And about 5 years ago, my wife, Kate, who's a doctoral level school psych, and I decided to open up Formative Psych Services, and it's been awesome. And we have just an incredibly talented team of therapists working out of our Ravenswood office, as well as our pretty brand new Northbrook office, providing services to kids and adolescents and families, as well as adults. We also provide school-based neuropsychological assessments. And we've partnered, last year, we partnered with over 30 school districts in providing trainings on everything school mental health related. And so I hope that some of that experience will lend itself to our time together tonight. And we'll jump in. All right, so let's talk a little bit about parenting. Okay, and so I want to give you a little bit of a framework for how I think about parenting. And I like doing this because it provides us with a little bit of a backdrop in terms of how of when we're making our decisions and how they impact our children as we're making the thousands of parenting decisions it seems like we make on a given day. The one thing I didn't mention too, and this I've taken to be a pretty valuable experience and a very humbling experience, which is I'm also a father of 3 boys between 10th grade and 2nd grade. So if you're feeling like you're right in the thick of it, I kind of feel that same way. I'm right in the thick of it with you. And when I think about parenting, I think about, just to try and simplify it, that there's 3 main roles that we play. Right? And the first one tends to be the easiest, and that's that we love our children. Right? It's just a biological force that when they come shooting out, we just love them and accept them and want to do anything that we can for them. And that's a pretty easy role for us to play for our kids. The second one that we continue to develop over the years as our kids develop is that of setting limits, right? That we know that kids benefit when there are consistent expectations and rules and limits, because it provides them with that safety and security that they know they can depend upon. And that predictability of, oh, if I do X, I know that I'm gonna lose Y. And that provides them with especially when the consequences attached to whatever rule it is that was broken and it makes sense and is logical. That's when that limit setting can really play an important role. And we'll think about that, right? Especially as we talk about managing technology within our current times, about how we set limits, with our kids. And finally, the third role of parenting that we think about, and to me, the one that is the most challenging, is fostering their independence. Parenting in a way that's going to make our child more and more independent each day, because at least in my experience, when I think back when my 15-year-old was 5, it doesn't seem like 10 years. It maybe was about 6 months ago that was the case. And it's going to be in the blink of an eye that he's off in college doing his own thing without any supervision. And so I want to make sure that the decisions I'm making as his dad are going to make him a little bit more independent and engage in that kind of critical, autonomous thinking that's going to allow him to be successful, not mistake-free, but successful and resilient. And that's another thing we'll be hitting a little bit on tonight is how to help build that resilience. Okay. So as we talk about and as all the different issues that we touch on tonight, and as you ask your questions, I encourage you to reflect, okay, in this situation, even before you ask the question, in this situation, is the way I'm responding right now, is it serving one of these three roles that we're talking about this evening? I also think that it's helpful within the context of COVID-19 that we talk about this thing called uncertainty. Because it has brought a lot of that to us over the recent past, right? It really, COVID-19, when you back up and think about it, it really presents a dangerous trio of factors to us, right? And that it's really been unpredictable. In some ways, there's actually ways that it seems like it is predictable. As the rules loosen up, the number of identified cases seem to go up. But in general, it's been really unpredictable. It seems uncontrollable, and it feels like it could last forever, or at least we don't know when it's going to end. And that level of uncertainty really strikes fear in us, but it goes beyond that. Right? It goes to those folks who may have lost employment, whose financial situation may have changed as a result of that, who no longer have daycare or who have kids within the home as the parents are trying to work. The educational progress that is or is not taking place. Right, all the way down to those more minute details of the day about, hey, when I place this Costco order, are they going to replace that really plush toilet paper with that sandpaper toilet paper and kind of put a damper on my next month here, right? And we need to acknowledge the very important, and this is a silver lining, I think, of COVID-19, is the social unrest that's happening and the undue effects, the disproportionate effects that COVID-19 is having on people of color. fear, right? This fear that this uncertainty causes us is a very natural reaction to uncertainty. And that's because biologically we're built not to like uncertainty, right? There's actually research studies that have been conducted to show that if I have a choice between maybe getting an electric shock within the next minute or so, or definitely receiving an electric shock in the next minute or so, I'm going to choose the certainty. I'm going to choose, and the research bears this out, I'm going to choose that electric shock. And it's because the idea of waiting to see triggers our autonomic nervous system. It triggers our sympathetic nervous system, right? And kicks on that fight or flight response and the stress response. And that becomes worse than the electric shock itself. And so we're much more likely to choose that certainty, even if it means for certain causing us pain. Right? And if we think about that trigger of stress and our autonomic nervous system's response to that stress, our body changes, our physiological processes change when we are triggered in that manner. And I'll give you just one small example of that, right? That when our sympathetic nervous system kicks on, which is what happens when there's a threat out there like COVID-19, we engage in what's called historically that fight or flight response. And it's a good response, right? It's there to protect us from bad things happening. The problem is when it's chronic and unresolved is when it becomes much more problematic. But one of the ways that our body changes as that sympathetic nervous system kicks on is what we hear. Right. As I'm here, I'm fairly regulated, to be honest. I'm a little bit nervous. I always get nervous for these kinds of opportunities, but I'm pretty regulated. I'm feeling pretty social. And so my ears are listening out. My auditory system is listening out for those sound waves that are kind of in the middle of the range that represent voice tones. And that's because as I'm regulated and calm for the most part, I'm seeking out social interaction. I'm pro-social in that moment. If my sympathetic nervous system kicks on, that changes. My auditory system now is searching for either really high pitched noises or very low pitched noises, growls to indicate that I might be in danger, or screams to indicate that another human being might be in danger. Okay. So that's just one small example of that, of kind of some of the uncertainty, some of the impact that uncertainty has. I'll add one more thing in there that typically isn't in here, but it is the season, and that's the election. I think this election, more than ever, and this has been borne out in the surveys, is causing a lot of people stress. 68% of American adults have identified this election as a significant stressor in their current being, right? And so that's another one that's going to be important for us to think about. And within our practice, we're encouraging our clinicians as well as identified clients for them to consider what the day or two around November 3rd is going to look like for them, so that they can provide a little bit of extra space for them to process all that's going on. And I think that's true no matter what side of the aisle you sit, no matter no matter who it is that you're looking to be elected. Okay, so that's that piece about uncertainty. It's important for us to be aware first where we are emotionally as parents, right? And I know we're talking about parenting, and so we're talking about how your kids are doing, but we can't have that conversation without having the conversation and that answering that question about how you are doing. How am I doing? And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? The very first obvious one is that we may not be regulating ourselves very well throughout this pandemic. There may be very, very real life threats and or consequences to COVID-19 that we've already experienced, are experiencing, or are worried we are going to experience. There have been already losses for each of us on some level. And I think that is universal. right? And what we need to watch out for as parents are some of those unhealthy ways of trying to regulate. Those quarantinis, right? That became really popular right out of the chute. There seem to be more and more happy hours than I've ever seen happen, and that it creates a new normal for us in terms of our alcohol intake and or other substance abuse intake. We know that for folks who struggle with opioid addiction, that is now going through the roof. And so we need to play really good defense against some of these maladaptive ways of coping, to watch our alcohol intake. A second piece that we need to be aware of is our consumption of social media. The Atlantic just came out with an article, I think it was just yesterday, about the negative impact that consuming political articles has on our emotional well-being. And it reads something like this: that for each article, each week we consume, our emotional well-being drops by about 6%. I can't define for you what that 6% means, but I can tell you that I know I've consumed more than one article this week. And I know that it has a negative impact on me. And so it's really important for us to titrate and insulate ourselves from this barrage of media, particularly within this election cycle, but really even outside of the election cycle. Right? Binge show watching, binge eating, all of those kinds of things. There's a dangerous normalization and acceptance that, oh, COVID-19 is happening. This is my way of coping. And while there might be some vices out there that we visit more than we used to, we need to play really good defense against it becoming any sort of habit and decreasing our ability to be fully present for our kids. Okay, and why does this matter? Why does and the chart that I have in front of you is from Mark Brackett, who's a very well-respected speaker and author about emotions. He created The Ruler, which is a social emotional curriculum for school districts. And he's got these charts for us to have a broader range of vocabulary and for us to be able to identify our own emotional functioning. Why does this matter so much, right? Sometimes we feel like, yeah, if I'm in the airplane and I put the oxygen mask on, I'm not doing myself first, I'm getting my kids taken care of. Well, this is why it matters so much. And I'll relate it to a phenomenon that I learned about not too long ago that has to do with pendulum clocks. That if I take a pendulum clock and I put it up on a wall and it's got its own rhythm, right? The pendulum swinging back and forth. And I take another pendulum clock and it's on its own individual rhythm, right? We would imagine that they're just going to maintain their own individual rhythms until their batteries run out. And that's not the case. They will sync to each other within a very short period of time. Because just through some of the sound pulses that they create in somewhat proximity on a solid wall from each other, they will begin to sync up. And living beings are no different. We sync emotionally with each other. And it happens for positive emotions, it happens with negative emotions. And it happens in the wild as well. If you think about birds flapping their wings or crickets chirping at night, there's example or after example of how and why we sync up with each other emotionally. And so if I go home tonight and I'm feeling really dysregulated and I sit down at the dinner table with my child and we're having a conversation, and for some reason my child asks how I'm doing, it's going to be best for the child for me to give a developmentally appropriate, a pretty accurate answer to that, because it'll match what they may be perceiving inherently and actually how I am doing emotionally, right? And so the better care we take of ourselves, we become that master pendulum clock for them. We set the biorhythms for them within our own home and within our family. And that's why it becomes so important. And so now I'm just going to jump right in and kind of talk about, so how do we parent these, some of these following issues, right? With the first one being, and one that I've always been fascinated by, which is motivation. that the thing I think I got the most calls about in April, late March and April last year is, oh my gosh, something is going on with my kid. They've lost all motivation. There is no work being completed. I'm so angry at this person and this organization, and my kid for not being able to do any work. What the heck is going on? And it's important for us to understand what motivation is, to understand why that was happening, because it was universal, particularly with adolescents. But I think for all of us, probably on some level, motivation just went out the window. And it makes sense when you think about what makes up motivation, right? And there's really three main factors. And those factors have to do with, first, competence, that we feel competent in the work that we're doing. And when you think about the level of scaffolding that often happens within the classroom and how many individual check-ins there are, and the system of concrete materials, particularly for those younger kids, that helps scaffold and support their feelings of competence in learning this new material. There might be context, visual context, for us to hang the new material on that we're surrounded by, which is much harder to achieve within the virtual realm. Autonomy is another big piece that's related to motivation. And that's when we get to choose or have some choice over how we're learning, what we're learning, how we're going to complete a project. And I will argue that as a school, schools in general and parents and many organizations need to get up to speed on what the science says about autonomy and how important it is. If we have strict, rigid adherence to state standards, we lose a lot of autonomy and we lose a lot with it in terms of motivation for learning. Finally, and this is the one that particularly in the spring, and for many people now, we were hit the hardest with, and that's to feel motivated. We need to have some sense of relatedness, that we're part of a community, right? Riding that wave of momentum with our peers as we're engaged with that learning. And so that's one of the ones that I think most people, right, are really upset about. And there's some people who are right suing schools to say you need to open up so that my kids can be with each other and so that I can get some work done here. Right, one of the biggest founders of educational theory, John Dewey, stated that education is a social process. And he was referring to this relatedness that is all important in motivation. So what can we do to increase our kids' motivation? And part of it, the answer really does depend. It depends a little bit on age. But I'll throw a few things out there that can hit a competence, autonomy, and relatedness. Right. And one of them, I'm going to start at the bottom, is to provide some sort of choice. Where is your learning spot going to be? How long are you going to be on a particular Zoom if there is a choice? When is your homework time going to be? Allowing some choice, at least an illusion of choice, but in as many ways as possible, the ability for that young person to have control or choice over how their learning is going to happen. Right. And I guess I'm going to work from the bottom up on this list. Supports to organize. I know that for in my experience in talking with many families, the way information was being delivered was really foreign to children, which often was these long threaded emails, and they needed to learn a new organizational system. And even, right, if we do a pretty good job of having a very clear color-coded talk with, hey, here's how you organize your information, we need to remember that our kids, no matter what age, their brains are still developing their ability to execute these executive functions. And executive functions are those domains of thinking that include planning and organization and impulse control and working memory, and those kinds of things. Um, and so particularly for our younger kids, they're going to need a lot more scaffolding. For our older kids, they still may need some scaffolding, and one 15-year-old could look like they're an adult in terms of how they function, and another 15-year-old may look like they're 7 or 8 in terms of how they function. And that may not be a willful defiance to not be organized. It may be a manifestation of where they're at in their brain development, which is important for us to think about, right? And so again, if we take that one issue and we think, okay, how do I make my kid more independent? Well, my dang 12-year-old ain't doing anything, and he's not organized, and I've already told him to be organized, and I gave him these 3 color-coded folders. What the heck's wrong with him? I'm going to punish him. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to punish him, and there's not going to be a device in this house for the next 2 weeks if he does that again. And we need to think about, is that teaching independence? Is that teaching him how to be organized? Are we joining with him against this issue, or are we putting our thumb on him without doing what the word discipline really means? And the Latin root for discipline means to teach, right? And so it's important for us to think about those things. Goal setting, and I'm going to lump future self into this. And I think about some of our kids who are in middle school and high school, kids who are really involved with math, kids who are involved in theater, kids who are involved in sports. Baseball is the sport for this evening, right? And so if I'm having a conversation about baseball with one of my kids, to say, hey, you said that you wanted to be doing X by winter time. All right, let's break that down a little bit and think what needs to happen this month in terms of how you're practicing. Well, I don't have anybody to practice with. Yeah, that makes sense. So what can we do to help you so that we're still moving forward toward this goal, even though you may not have teammates or not be allowed to practice with teammates at this point, so that when that time comes, you're not wishing that you had done some things to put yourself in a better position. Having them really explicitly visualize and define where they would like to be in school with their grades, right? The GPA is probably still going to matter. If we've got a freshman in high school, it's still going to matter 4 years from now. And more importantly than the GPA is what they're learning. Are they mastering some of the learning targets that are being put forth? And so having them visualize that future self and knowing that there's a connection with what they do today with how they're doing tomorrow or a year from now, whatever that may be. Managing tech use, that has been, I think, another very common question, which is why I included in this presentation. And so how do we parent in this time our technology use? And this is really hard for me, a hard topic for me to talk about. And it's because I do a youth and technology talk for school communities, and I've been sounding the alarm for several years about this topic, and I'm very passionate about it. And now I'm here saying we got to be a little bit more flexible with our time limits on technology use. And I throw up a little bit in my mouth as I say that, but not fully flexible. And we still need to be mindful about what type of technology use we're being flexible with. And here's what I mean. Is that if our kids are not allowed to see their friends and they can engage socially online, that is better than nothing. It allows them to continue to feel like they belong. It allows them to connect with peers who are going through the same thing they are. And even if it's during a video game, they're experiencing joy together. And while it's not as potent, that kind of those biorhythms that I was talking about earlier, where we become emotionally in sync with each other, it's not as potent as if we were person to person. It still happens. It's why video therapy and teletherapy has good research behind it to say it still works. And so to have our kids be able to be involved in that can help insulate them from subsequent feelings of anxiety or depression as a result of quarantining. So a little bit of flexibility. So, one way to think about, well, how much, Frampton, how much are we talking here, right? What the research has consistently shown, and this is one of the things that I would preach prior to COVID-19, is that once we get over 2 hours of screen time, we start to see a decline in mental health functioning. We see increases in anxiety, increases in depression, decreases of attention, so increased ADHD-like symptoms, and I could go on, unfortunately. And I'm hoping there's an NIMH study that had $300 million worth of funding that was launched a few years ago, that's going to give us some really definitive results down the road. And I'm eagerly awaiting those results to see from a brain functioning standpoint the impact, especially chronic users might experience. One way for us to think about technology use is to use that family media plan on the American Academy of Pediatrics website. Just like we have those conversations about fire safety and what if a fire happened, let's come up with a plan where the family would go in an event like that. This plan allows us to back in to how many hours seems like an appropriate number of hours for our kids to be engaged in tech use. Another way for us to think about that is using one of those monitoring apps like Circle, that I think is a Disney founded app, that can allow us to put some limits on particular types of particular types of technology use, and perhaps provide more time for other types of technology use, so that we can keep an eye on that. If you haven't seen Social Dilemma, I encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested in learning some more, as that documentary on Netflix has gotten some rave reviews. We need to monitor our kids' technology use with autonomy in mind, right? And that's a piece that all of us need to be aware of. So if you haven't checked your screen time in the past week or two, I encourage you to check yours, because as you check your screen time, and if it's 7 hours in a day, again, right, that's your pendulum swing. You're setting that model for your kids. Now, some of our jobs and things like that require that. And I think it's helpful sometimes to even be explicit in stating to our kids, hey, I'm reading a book, or I'm reading the paper, or I'm doing this on the device. And then, of course, having those no media times scheduled during the family day. Talking about technology, so sorry, one piece I want to add to that is, in fostering autonomy and our kids' independence in using technology, we want them to develop a healthy relationship with technology, right? So we want to start developing, how do they self-regulate? And we can start to have those conversations as early as they have devices. And I encourage families to wait as long as possible to have those devices, because they are addictive, and we know that to be very true. Right. But starting those questions often and early about, what were your experiences on technology? Hey, you just got, as an 8th grader, you just got Snapchat. And I've heard things can really go south on there. Has that happened for you? And if it has, what was it like? How did it end up? Right. Talking about digital citizenship and all of those things. If we talk about technology as a common enemy, we can externalize it from our child and from ourselves. And what I mean by that is, right, technology today isn't the same technology that I had playing Sega or Atari growing up. I didn't have 6 engineers on the other end of my TV screen getting paid $1 million cumulative to develop a strategy based on my responses to draw me back in. And so having a healthy, understanding that that's what's happening against our kiddo can help us externalize this idea and align with our child, and say, if they snap back at us when we ask them to come to dinner and they're upstairs in their room trying to finish up a game of Fortnite, hey, the tech really sucked you in again tonight, didn't it? I noticed that when I called you, you really snapped back at me. Can we have a talk about that? And I wonder how we can come together to not let technology do that to you again, so that you don't have to deal with the consequence, right? And having that kind of language. I'm going to try and get through a couple more screens in 10 minutes. And I appreciate all of you guys hanging in there with me during this group of slides. So how do we foster that sense of control during the pandemic? Right. And there's a few ways that I encourage parents to talk to kids about this. Right. And one of them is the 2 buckets technique, to say, hey, I know that you're upset that this was canceled, and we experienced that within our family. We had once for one of our kids, there was like 4 events that just in a cascade got canceled, and the emotional impact became more and more intense with each one. And so we talk about these 2 buckets, and this is helpful for us as well, right, to help deal with the uncertainty that's out there. That we have these things that we can control, that we can choose, that we can do, that we can act upon. And we got all these other things that right now are out of our control, and out of our control in a big way. When we think about these things that are out of control, we can lean into the uncertainty. We can become overwhelmed by it. It can put us to our knees, and that's okay, because we're human and emotional beings. And then after that, we're going to put that bucket on the shelf, because we just can't do much with it. And we're going to focus on this bucket here. And in fact, we're going to try and add to it, because there's some things that I want to see happen in the future that are important to my belief system. And I'm going to start acting in a way that's consistent with that belief system, and can give me a sense of control over this time that seems to have so much uncertainty. Allowing our kids to contribute to what the new routine looks like, right? So if your mornings before e-learning aren't going so well, and it's a drag just to get them to, right? Now think about baseball practice. What we do is we set specific routines about who needs to be where and when to start the practice, so that the coach isn't having to blabber on about where everybody needs to be and what they need to be doing. Routines are incredibly important because they provide a decision set. If you remember, and you likely do, in March when we became quarantined, all of our decision sets were thrown out the window. If you weren't exhausted, I would love for you to be presenting tonight, and I'll sit down, because I was exhausted and still am these days, but especially when our routines were thrown out the window. And that's because each routine has about 50 decisions in there that are already taken care of for us. And when the routines go out the window, all of a sudden we've got 50 new decisions to make, right? And so there's a whole lot of mental energy and physical energy being put into the development of those routines. But having our kids being able to contribute to some of the decision making for those routines can be really beneficial. Offering as many choices, right? What's for dinner? When are we going to have breakfast for dinner? What's the weekend going to look like? Allowing them to contribute and have some choice over what that's going to look like. I think for our adolescents, Independence Days are huge. And so what does that look like? And why am I referring to that? Well, if you think about what an adolescent's day looks like pre-COVID, and what it will look like post-COVID, is getting up in the morning right at 7 o'clock, getting themselves ready, getting their bag packed, and they're out the door. And particularly if they're involved in an extracurricular, we see them when? Maybe at dinner time, maybe a little bit after. Sorry, I just got a message that right, here's our uncertainty. My internet here at work is a little bit unstable, so I'll count on Kate, if you can shoot me a text on the phone if I'm freezing up at all, then I'll figure that out. I think I might have a hard line here. Right, and so if we think about that example that I just ran down, our adolescent is independent from us for at least 12 hours on a given day, and all of a sudden they're home. And all of a sudden, we're dying to peek in on them during a Zoom class in order to see what the heck it is that they're doing, right? And then they're with us during breaks, and they're with us right after school, and they're with us for dinner. And those opportunities for autonomy are out the window. So providing an Independence Day where they get to choose what they're going to do independent from us may give them a little sense of empowerment to say, hey, my family's recognizing that I'm an adolescent and I can handle myself. Okay. If my choppy audio continues, please let me know. I'm going to do one thing to see if this helps. Give me 1 second. All right, I apologize. If that continues, thank you, Jim, for letting me know that. Let me know, and I will do my best to take care of it. I'm going to skip to the next screen here, which is coping, which is obviously a big one. And I think for me, the one of the things I fear when we talk about coping is that our emotions are to be managed to the point that they're not expressed. And I do not think about emotions that way. We need to process our emotions, and particularly during a time when we're quarantined and experiencing all of these changes and distress, we need to emote those emotions. They need to be expressed in some way, shape, or form. Okay. Coping is not allowing those emotions to keep us underwater. Coping is managing them when we're in a moment when we need to perform. And so let's talk about a couple of different ways that we can do that. And the first thing that I'll mention is breathing. And that one just seems so boring. And you've heard it 1,000 times starting in kindergarten. And yet it's got more research behind it than just about anything else. And so mindfulness activities and breathing opposes stress and anxiety. It sends a signal to our physiology that we can start to become calm and become regulated. And then our body begins that physiological change to be pro-social again. And so practicing the breathing on a regular basis can be really powerful. In talking about stress, right? And in talking about our sympathetic nervous system being triggered and in being engaged in that fight or flight response, from a physiological standpoint, our body wants an answer. It wants to know, what are you gonna do about this threat, right? Now, we can't go out there and fix it, but we can go for a really arduous run. We can build a little mini gym in the garage and work out, or in the living room. We can do jumping jacks in the corner of a crowded home, right? We can engage in exercise. And that answers our body's question of, hey, we're triggered, we got to do something. And once you've exercised, that's when we see some endorphins released. And exercise continues to be, it's proven by the research, it continues to be more powerful than any medication out there in insulating us from feelings of anxiety and depression. The 3 dailies is another, right? And the 3 dailies has to do with on a daily basis, I'm going to do something caring for myself. I'm going to do something caring for a loved one, and I'm going to do something caring for my community. Acts of generosity provide us with, and again, insulate us from feelings of anxiety and depression. And it happens, the research would show that after a solid act of generosity, you've got this 24-hour blanket of insulation happening. And so if we're doing this on a daily basis, we're really helping not only ourselves, but our community and family as well. I could go on and on about the research behind nature. I'll share this with you, that the number of pediatricians across the country who, instead of writing a script with a diagnosis of ADHD, are first writing a script for the child to spend X number of hours at a local park, are going through the roof. And it's because that's what the science says we need. We need to be connected with nature. It has an amazingly powerful way of putting us putting things into perspective. And the last thing that I'll mention is holding in the same hand two ideas that do not oppose each other, and that's self-compassion and perspective. Right? And self-compassion is that understanding that after a really hard day where you did your best and you sprinted a mile and still not everything got done, that you're coming alongside yourself and understanding that you gave it all that you had. Not every hair is in place. Not every pair of underwear is folded or in its drawer, and not every room is put together, but you made it through the day. And perspective that this isn't the first time we've been here, right? And I'm going to show you this picture here, since it's a Bash baseball night, right? That during the Spanish flu, we were all wearing masks. We weren't allowed on the trolley unless we had a mask on. The batter, the catcher, and the ump all had masks on, and they made it through. Right. And not only, well, I'll come back to that statement in just a second. And going back to the 3 dailies, right? When schools were closed during the Spanish flu, many American kids were engaged in woodworking, and not for themselves, but to create toys and gifts for children, refugee children overseas. And that's one of the ways that they coped with the quarantine that they were involved in. Right. And so if we think about the Spanish flu, and when I do, it's important to me, as I lost my great-grandfather to the Spanish flu. One of the things that we can think of as our biorhythms are in sync with each other, in acknowledging the collective loss that we have all experienced, that many of us can experience, and as a community, we can experience post-traumatic growth. That after this begins to conclude and we move on to our next chapter, that we can even move beyond where we were before as a result of the experience we endured. And that's what happened largely, if you think about, after the Spanish flu, when the Roaring '20s kicked in and productivity went through, and creativity went through the roof. And all of those things together, right, provide resilience, not only for our kids, but for us as well. And if we're resilient, we're modeling that for our kids to follow suit. And that's where I'm going to stop. I went just a couple of minutes over. I know I went through a lot of things very quickly. And so if you have any questions, I'd love you to throw it in the Q&A, and I'm going to stick around for a few minutes to answer those questions. I apologize that it sounds like the audio got a little bit choppy. I hope it cleaned up after all I did. You know what my great technological intervention was, is I opened 2 doors to the router here in the office. So I apologize for that lack of quality that you had to endure there for a couple of minutes. Any questions that I can answer that are specific to yours or somebody else's situation? And I'll allow Kate to jump in to ask those.
There aren't any questions in the Q&A section at this time.
That's because I did an awesome job then. I just answered every single question. That's amazing.
Okay. John, in baseball, we teach not to focus on what ifs, but on what is. Is that something you talk about?
Yeah, I think I think has a little bit to do with uncertainty. So not to focus on what ifs, but to focus on what is. To me, what ifs have a lot to do with the past, and they go in that bucket that I can't control. Right? What if, and I, as a student athlete in high school, a couple of those moments pop right up into my mind. Man, what if I made that shot, or what if I caught that pass? That would have been great. That alls that does is punish our current self. And so I think of a resolution to that as self-acceptance. And how I think about self-acceptance, the very first step of self-acceptance is beginning to act in a way that's for myself. And as I do that, I become present in the moment. I become present with what is. And the more present I am in the moment and less distracted about past events and the what ifs of the world, the more available I am to the outcome that I'm hoping for. And the other piece that I'll add to that is really our growth-minded language as opposed to our fixed language, which is, if you're interested in that stuff, Carol Dweck is just a brilliant researcher and really founder of growth-minded language to show that if we use that for our kids as a teacher, as a parent, as a coach, that we see a greater outcome because it provides a ceilingless setting for them to perform.
Okay. Next question here. Do you have any advice for a part-time caregiver, not a full-time parent?
Yeah, so I think I might need a little bit more context. So the first example of that comes to mind is for parents who share custody of a child who's going back and forth to the same house. And we actually have a resource on our website, fpschicago.com. I can't name it off the top of my head, but Kate is the stepmom of my oldest son, Oscar, who splits time between his mom's house and ours. And I think one of the things that we've found instrumental is to put his needs first and foremost, and to have those conversations to make our e-learning experience for him as similar as possible to each other, recognizing that there's going to be some individual differences. And so if I'm a part-time caretaker, if I'm only with my child for part of that time, I think having that open communication is really vital. If that's not possible, I think, to me, the process continues to be the same in that we're inviting our child to have some input into our environment while they're there. My experience was, and this is, is that the younger the child is, if they're with a caretaker Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and not there on the weekends, for example, on Monday, there's going to need to be extra time for that transition to happen, for that child to acclimate, even though they've been there before, even though they're with a loving and trusting parent, just to get oriented to the new house, to get their bearings. And so having a process and a routine for that prior to the e-learning to take place, I think would be really important to increase their comfort level.
Okay. And then next question is, how do you help a kid that has given up?
A kid that has given up. That depends on what I think the function of giving up might be, right? And how acutely it came to be. And what I mean by that is, if I talked earlier about some of our kids have had a cascade of losses, right? And so if a kid's functioning fine, and they experience 3 or 4 losses right away that just hit them over the head, and they throw up the white flag and say, I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not doing Zoom. I'm not talking to a therapist. I'm not talking to my parents. I'm out. That obviously is really concerning. And we can think about that group of losses as a compounding trauma that they've just experienced. And so we would need to keep coming up alongside them to engage them, to allow them opportunities to talk about how big of a loss they've experienced. It can also be much more insidious in its development, right? Where we saw some minor signs of lack of motivation in the spring, and some of that transferred to the summer, but then it really hit this fall as we've asked kids, especially high schoolers, to be engaged in Zoom for 6 hours a day, which is not a feasible learning experience. Um, and if it's much more insidious than that, again, I would think about certainly seeking out a therapist for them. And if they're unwilling, then you as a parent engaging the therapist, who often can provide some parent consultation and ideas to help break through to that child who has thrown up the white flag, which makes me sad to even think about. And my heart goes out to the person asking that question.
Okay, that is the last question that we have at this time.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate those questions. Our website is www.fpschicago.com. Oh, I think we've got one more question on here, and I'll read that to the crowd, Kate. I've got it up here. And the question is, what I saw over the summer was that the kids who were with us in multiple camp sessions showed improvement in behavior and interactions. Is that a sign of the resiliency of kids? And should we be optimistic that when things do get back to normal, the kids can bounce back from the issues they have? And the answer is, can we be hopeful? And the answer is a resounding yes. I think that we can be hopeful. I think by us demonstrating that the most important thing is that we're putting one foot in front of the other, despite all of the chaos this has created for us, that we are setting the model for resilience, and we're teaching them a more important lesson than any lesson they would learn in school this year. And that will keep serving them well into adulthood. Many of the things that our kids are losing as a result of some of the quarantining, social skills, perseverance, attention, many of those things can bounce back. And I'll provide you with a piece of research that actually took a large group of kids and split them up into two. Everybody was using their devices 5+ hours in a day. And they put them into two camps. And in one camp, they allowed them to continue to use the device. And in the other camp, they had no devices. And what they saw, they screened the kids before they started camp, and social skills were delayed, attention was delayed. And by the end of a 2-week camp, the campers who did not have the devices saw their social skills, empathy, and attentional functioning go back to baseline, whereas the kids who were still engaged in devices did not. And that makes sense, right? What we're using is what we're going to continue to develop. And so that's what I thought of when Jim had asked that original question is, yeah, right, the kids just got done with the quarantine. And that means that they've been prevented from having social interactions with same age peers for the past few months, right? And so it makes sense that they're kind of like delayed a couple of years during the first camp, but hopefully by the end of the summer we start to see some improvement. And that, again, that's something that's important for us to realize, is that, you know, when we go back face to face, if our kid is having a little bit of trouble, to come alongside them and to support them in their development, perhaps as opposed to punishment right away, as those skills are being redeveloped and coming back to where they need to be. Great question.
And I will put a link to the co-parenting article you mentioned in the chat for everybody who would like to see that, as well as our website.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you to Bash Sports Academy and Jim Price, and thank you to all of our participants tonight for sharing part of your Tuesday evening with us. I hope everybody has a great rest of your night and a great week, and feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions that you didn't feel real comfortable putting in an open Q&A. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.